Alms or almsgiving involves giving to others as an act of virtue, either materially or in the sense of providing capabilities for free. It exists in a number of religions and regions. The word, in the modern English language, comes from the Old English ելμesse, I am, from late Latin ἐλεήμοσynē, from Greek lambda epsilon eta mu omicron sigma upsilon nu eta ելεημοσύνη, pity, alms, from lambda epsilon eta mu omega nu ելεήμων, merciful, from lambda epsilon omicron sigma eleos, pity. Judaism. In Judaism, tzedakah, a Hebrew term literally meaning righteousness but commonly used to signify charity, refers to the religious obligation to do what is right and just. Contemporary tzedakah is regarded as a continuation of the biblical māsa ani, or portai, as well as biblical practices including permitting the poor to glean the corners of a field harvest during the Shemitah, and other practices. Tzedakah, along with prayer and repentance, is regarded as ameliorating the consequences of bad acts. In Judaism, tzedakah is seen as one of the greatest deeds that man can do. Jewish farmers are commanded to leave the corners of the fields for the starving to harvest for food and are forbidden to pick up any grain that has been dropped during harvesting, as such food shall be left for the starving as well. Famous Jewish scholar and sage Maimonides has been noted for creating a list of charity, with the most righteous form being allowing an individual to become self-sustaining and capable of giving others charity. 1. Enabling the recipient to become self-reliant. 2. Giving when neither party knows the other's identity. 3. Giving when you know the recipient's identity, but the recipient doesn't know your identity. 4. Giving when you do not know the recipient's identity, but the recipient knows your identity. 5. Giving before being asked. 6. Giving after being asked. 7. Giving less than you should, but giving it cheerfully. 8. Giving begrudgingly. Islam. In Islam, the concept of charitable giving is generally divided into voluntary giving, or sadaqah, and the zakat, an obligatory practice governed by a specific set of rules within Islamic jurisprudence, and intended to fulfill a well-defined set of theological and social requirements. For that reason, while zakat plays a much larger role within Islamic charity, sadaqah is possibly a better translation of Christian-influenced formulations of the notion of alms. Zakat is the third of the 5 pillars of Islam. Various rules attach to the practice, but, in general terms, it is obligatory to give 2.5% of one's savings and business revenue and 5 to 10% of one's harvest to the poor. Possible recipients include the destitute, the working poor, those who are unable to pay off their own debts, stranded travelers, and others who need assistance, with the general principle of zakah always being that the rich should pay it to the poor. One of the most important principles of Islam is that all things belong to God and, therefore, wealth is held by human beings in trust. The literal meaning of the word zakat is to purify, to develop, and cause to grow. According to Sharia, it is an act of worship. Our possessions are purified by setting aside a proportion for those in need. This cutting back, like the pruning of plants, balances and encourages new growth. Zakat is the amount of money that every adult, mentally stable, free, and financially able Muslim, male or female, has to pay to support specific categories of people. This category of people is defined in Surah Tawbah verse 60. The alms are only for the poor and the needy, and those who collect them, and those whose hearts are to be reconciled, and to free the captives and the debtors, and for the cause of Allah, and the wayfarers, a duty imposed by Allah. Allah is knower, wise. The obligatory nature of zakat is firmly established in the Quran, the Sunnah, and the consensus of the companions and the Muslim scholars. Allah states in Surah At-Tawbah verses 34-35, O ye who believe, there are indeed many among the priests and anchorites who in falsehood devour the substance of men and hinder from the way of Allah. And there are those who bury gold and silver and spend it not in the way of Allah. Announce unto them a most grievous penalty on the day when heat will be produced out of it in the fire of hell, and with it will be branded the foreheads, the flanks, and the backs, the flanks, and the backs. This is the which ye buried for yourselves. Taste ye, then, the ye buried. Muslims of each era have agreed upon the obligatory nature of paying zakat for gold and silver, and from those the other kinds of currency. Zakat is obligatory when a certain amount of money, called the nisab, is reached or exceeded. Zakat is not obligatory if the amount owned is less than this nisab. The nisab of golden currency is 20 mithqal, approximately 85 grams of pure gold. 1 mithqal is approximately 4.25 grams. The nisab of silver and silver currency is 200 dirhams, which is approximately 595 grams of pure silver. The nisab of other kinds of money and currency is to be scaled to that of gold. The nisab of money is equivalent to the price of 85 grams of 999 type gold on the day in which zakat is paid. Zakat is obligatory after the money has been in the control of its owner from the span of 1 lunar year. Then the owner needs to pay 2.5% of the money as zakat. The owner should deduct any amount of money he or she borrowed from others, then check if the rest reaches the necessary nisab, then pays zakat for it. If the owner had enough money to satisfy the nisab at the beginning of the year, but his wealth in any form increased, the owner needs to add the increase to the nisab amount owned at the beginning of the year, then pay zakat, 2.5% of the total at the end of the lunar year. There are minor differences between fiqh school on how this is to be calculated. Each Muslim calculates his or her own zakat individually. For most purposes, this involves the payment each year of 2.5% of one's capital. A pious person may also give as much as he or she pleases as sadaqah, and does so preferably in secret. Although this word can be translated as voluntary charity, it has a wider meaning. The Prophet said, even meeting your brother with a cheerful face is charity. The Prophet said, charity is a necessity for every Muslim. He was asked, what if a person has nothing? The Prophet replied, he should work with his own hands for his benefit and then give something out of such earnings in charity. The companions asked, what if he is not able to work? The Prophet said, he should help poor and needy persons. The companions further asked, what if he cannot do even that? The Prophet said, he should urge others to do good. The companions said, what if he lacks that also? The Prophet said, he should check himself from doing evil. That is also charity. Buddhism. In Buddhism, alms or almsgiving is the respect given by a lay Buddhist or Buddhist monk, nun, spiritually developed person or other sentient being. It is not charity as presumed by Western interpreters. It is closer to a symbolic connection to the spiritual realm and to show humbleness and respect in the presence of the secular society. The act of almsgiving assists in connecting the human to the monk and nun and what she represents. As the Buddha has stated, in Theravada Buddhism, nuns and monks go on a daily alms round to collect food. This is often perceived as giving the laypeople the opportunity to make merit. Money cannot be accepted by a Theravada Buddhist monk and nun in lieu of or in addition to food. as the Patimokkha training rules make it an offense worth forfeiture and confession. In countries that follow Mahayana Buddhism, the practice of a daily alms round has mostly died out. In China, Korea and Japan, local cultures resisted the idea of giving food to begging clerics, and there was no tradition of gaining merit by donating to practitioners. After periods of persecution, monasteries were situated in remote mountain areas in which the distance between the monastery and the nearest towns would make a daily alms round impossible. In Japan, the practice of a weekly or monthly takuhatsu replaced the daily round. In the Himalayan countries, the large number of bhikshus would have made an alms round a heavy burden on families. Competition with other religions for support also made daily alms rounds difficult and even dangerous. The first Buddhist monks in the Silla dynasty of Korea were said to be beaten due to the minority at the time. In Buddhism, both almsgiving and, more generally, giving are called dana. Such giving is one of the three elements of the path of practice as formulated by the Buddha for laypeople. This path of practice for laypeople is dana, sila, bhavana. The paradox in Buddhism is that the more a person gives, and the more one gives without seeking something in return, the wealthier one will become. By giving, one destroys those acquisitive impulses that ultimately lead to further suffering. Generosity is also expressed towards other sentient beings as both a cause for merit and to aid the receiver of the gift. In Mahayana tradition, it is accepted that although the three jewels of refuge are the basis of the greatest merit, by seeing other sentient beings as having Buddhanicca and making offerings towards the aspirational Buddha to be within them is of equal benefit. Generosity towards other sentient beings is greatly emphasized in Mahayana as one of the perfections as shown in Lama Tsongkhapas, the abbreviated points of the graded path. In Buddhism, giving of alms is the beginning of one's journey to nirvana. In practice, one can give anything with or without thought for nibbana. This would lead to faith, one key power that one should generate within oneself for the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. The motives behind giving play an important role in developing spiritual qualities. The suttas record various motives for exercising generosity. For example, the Anguttara Nikaya enumerates the following 8 motives of sajadanam deti. One gives with annoyance, or as a way of offending the recipient, or with the idea of insulting him. Bhayudanam deti. Fear also can motivate a person to make an offering. Adasimiti danam deti. One gives in return for a favor done to oneself in the past. Dasatimiti danam deti. One also may give with the hope of getting a similar favor for oneself in the future. Sadhu dananti danam deti. One gives because giving is considered good. Aham pakami, iamini pakanti, nararahami pakanto apakantanamadatanti danam deti. I cook, they do not cook. It is not proper for me who cooks not to give to those who do not cook. Quote, some give urged by such altruistic motives. Imam me danam dadato kalyano kitty sado abhagakatiti danam deti. Some give alms to gain a good reputation. Chittalankara chittaparikaratham danam deti. Still others give alms to adorn and beautify the mind. According to the Pali Canon, of all gifts, the gift of Dhamma is the highest. Christianity. The giving of alms is an act of charity toward those less fortunate. In the Apostolic Age, Christians were taught that giving alms was an expression of love which was first expressed by God to them in that Jesus sacrificed himself as an act of love for the salvation of believers. The offertory is the traditional moment in Roman Catholic Mass, Anglican Eucharist, and Lutheran divine services when alms are collected. Some Protestant groups, such as Baptists or Methodists, also engage in alms, although it is more commonly referred to as tithes and offerings by the Church. Some fellowships practice regular giving for special purposes called love offerings for the poor, destitute, or victims of catastrophic loss such as home fires or medical expenses. Traditionally, deacons and deaconesses are responsible for distributing these gifts among widows, orphans, and others in need. Many Christians support a plethora of charitable organizations, not all of which claim a Christian religious affiliation. Many American educational and medical institutions were founded by Christian fellowships giving alms. In the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Eastern Catholic Churches, the collection of alms and tithes has not been formally united to the offertory in any liturgical action. However, either having a collection played in the narthex or passing it unobtrusively during the service is not uncommon. In Orthodox theology, almsgiving is an important part of the spiritual life, and fasting should always be accompanied by increased prayer and almsgiving. Almsgiving in the name of the deceased also frequently accompanies prayer for the dead. Those whose financial circumstances do not permit the giving of monetary alms may give alms in other ways, such as intercessory prayer and acts of mercy. In the majority of Christian forms of worship and denominations, a collection of tithes and offerings is given for the support of the Church's mission, budget, ministry, and for its relief of the poor. As an important act of Christian charity, united to communal prayer, in some churches the offering plate or offering basket is placed upon the altar as a sign that the offering is made to God, and a sign of the bond of Christian love. In addition, private acts of charity, considered virtuous only if not done for others to admire, are seen as a Christian duty. Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness as in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. The outward and an inward giving of alms. Here Jesus places the primary focus on the motives behind such acts, which should be love. Rather, give as alms what is inside, and then everything will be clean for you. Giving of the rich versus the poor. Here Jesus contrasts the giving of the rich and the poor. He looked up and saw the rich putting the gifts into the treasury, and he saw a poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them, for they all out of the surplus put into the offering, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on." Giving out of love and not out of duty. He will reply, "I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Hinduism. Dana is an ancient concept of almsgiving dating to the Vedic period of Hinduism. The word for alms in Vedic literature is bhiksha. The Rig Veda has the earliest discussion of dana in the Vedas and offers reasons for the virtue of almsgiving. The early Upanishads, those composed before 500 BCE, also discuss the virtue of almsgiving. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, in verse 5.2.3 for example, states that 3 characteristics of a good, developed person are self-restraint, compassion, a love for all sentient life, and charity. Chandogya Upanishad, Book 3, similarly, states that a virtuous life requires tapas, dana, arjava, ahimsa and satyavartana. Bhagavad Gita describes the right and wrong forms of dana in verses 17.20 through 17.22. The Adi Parva of the Hindu epic Mahabharata in chapter 91 states that a person must first acquire wealth by honest means, then embark on charity, be hospitable to those who come to him, never inflict pain on any living being, and share a portion with others whatever he consumes. In the Vanaparva, chapter 194, the Mahabharata recommends that one must conquer the mean by charity, the untruthful by truth, the wicked by forgiveness, and dishonesty by honesty. The Bhagavata Purana discusses when dana is proper and when it is improper. In Book 8, Chapter 19, the verse 36, it states that charity is inappropriate if it endangers and cripples modest livelihood of one's biological dependence, or of one's own. Charity from surplus income above that required for modest living is recommended in the Puranas. Dana has been defined in traditional texts as any action of relinquishing the ownership of what one considered or identified as one's own, and investing the same in a recipient without expecting anything in return. While dana is typically given to one person or family, Hinduism also discusses charity, a giving aimed at public benefit, sometimes called utsarga. This aims at larger projects such as building a rest house, school, drinking water or irrigation well, planting trees, and building care facility, among others. Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, the 11th century Persian historian, who visited and lived in India for 16 years from about 1017 CE, mentions the practice of charity and almsgiving among Hindus as he observed during his stay. He wrote, "It is obligatory with them every day to give alms as much as possible." Quote, "After the taxes there are different opinions on how to spend their income. Some destine 1/9 of it for alms. Others divide this income into 4 portions. 1/4 is destined for common expenses, the 2nd for liberal works of a noble mind, the 3rd for alms, and the 4th for being kept in reserve." Almsgiving is held as a noble deed in Hinduism, to be done without expectation of any return from those who receive the charity. Some texts reason, referring to the nature of social life, that charity is a form of good karma that affects one's future circumstances and environment, and that good charitable deeds leads to good future life because of the reciprocity principle. Other Hindu texts, such as Vyasa Samhita, state that reciprocity may be innate in human nature and social functions, but dana is a virtue in itself, as doing good lifts the nature of one who gives. The texts do not recommend charity to unworthy recipients or where charity may harm or encourage injury to or by the recipient. Dana, thus, is a dharmic act, requires idealistic normative approach, and has spiritual and philosophical context. Some medieval-era authors state that dana is best done with shraddha, which is defined as being in good will, cheerful, welcoming the recipient of the charity, and giving without anasulya. These scholars of Hinduism, states Kohler, suggest that charity is most effective when it is done with delight, a sense of unquestioning hospitality, where the dana ignores the short-term weaknesses as well as the circumstances of the recipient and takes a long-term view. Satrams, also called dharamshala or chathrams in parts of India, have been one means of almsgiving in Hinduism. Satrams are shelters for travelers and the poor, with many serving water and free food. These were usually established along the roads connecting major Hindu temple sites in South Asia, as well as near major temples. Hindu temples have served as institutions for almsgiving. The dana the temples received from Hindus were used to feed people in distress as well as fund public projects such as irrigation and land reclamation. Other forms of almsgiving in Hinduism includes donating means of economic activity and food source. For example, Godana, Bhu Dana, and Vidya Dana or Jnana Dana, gift of knowledge and skills. Aushadha Dana, charity of care for the sick and diseased. Abhay Dana, giving freedom from fear, and Anna Dana, giving food to the poor, needy and all visitors. Between giving food and giving knowledge, Hindu texts suggest the gift of knowledge is superior. Bibliography